Welcome everybody to Safer Everyday's event today. Good to see you all, good to see those on Teams. Possibly an interesting but maybe a little bit of a dry subject today. We're talking about the importance of policies, procedures and guidelines in health and social care. Now it is a really important topic, but I think some of us just possibly almost want to yawn at the thought of it sometimes. But we're going to try and make it as interesting as we can and as relevant as we can. So thank you for coming along. Those who are on Teams, as per usual, please keep your mics and cameras off. We will have questions, so please feel free at any point in the process to type your question in Teams, and at the end we'll go through them. We will also potentially try to do a little bit of a questionnaire at the end, a little bit of a survey, and it will become obvious at the very end. So again, I'll share that on Teams for you to type your responses in. You're in a safe space. I won't say who it is who said it, but obviously we can go through that at the end. So Jenny is kindly going to help me today as we talk about policies and procedures. And I'm probably preaching to people who know the business, but it really is important. So, why has that decided it is not now working? It was working. Hang on, we now have a technical. The joys of.
It's working on the keyboard. I'm happy to go.
I don't think it is. Oh, is it? Right. Oh, now it is. Sorry. Technical challenges come all the time, don't they? So good policy management and policies in healthcare really do matter, and it's really crucial for any health and social care system. It shows that employees care about the organisation. It shows that we are important and we matter. And it's also really important to establish some real ground rules, some expectations. And this is important for the patients and service users that we support, but it's also important to the providers, so HSC, the nursing and care homes, the general practitioners, MSG, and also to the patients, to the staff and to systems as a whole. So when we think of the bailiwick-wide provision for health and social care, that's really important. Policies matter. Why do they matter? Because actually they help avoid communication problems. Now, what is one of the biggest issues around safety events? Communication. We all know it, and we all think we're quite good at it, and sometimes we are, and sometimes we fail. But policy is really crucial to communicate matters. And actually, why is that crucial? Because as I said, it's patient safety incidents and events that communication is the problem. And by having robust policies and procedures, we help avoid and reduce the human error in making decisions. When you're under pressure, it's a lot harder to make decisions, but the policies and procedures take away some of that pressure. And actually, the other thing to note is it's beneficial for all of us. It's beneficial for us as staff, but it's also beneficial for the patients to know what is the process, what is acceptable, what do we do. And it's also helpful for us to know what the expectations are should we be in receipt of services. So again, another thing, this is just flagging up so those important bits. So it provides service users with high quality care. That is why it's really important. And whilst we probably think, and may well be correct, that we do deliver high quality care, do our policies and procedures reflect that? That's just a question for us. Reduce variability. So again, I might think something is the right thing to do, so might somebody else in the room, and it might be very different to what I think is right. But actually, by having something that steers us in the right direction, reduces that variability, which may result in harm. It provides an insider's viewpoint and that educates the knowledge of local government. So actually, our policies and procedures and guidelines will educate the states to recognise the challenges that are in health and social care provision. It will help inform future health and care social needs. And it's really important for those who make larger policies than just the ones that we do with health and social care. It helps us identify issues within the systems and helps us propose solutions. It also potentially has the ability to promote and direct legislation. And something that's really worthy of note is the fact that whilst we have policies alone are no good. We need procedures. And equally, procedures on their own with no policy is not appropriate either. So policies without procedures result in consistent practice. So that's another crucial part. And they guide our daily decision making. So again, if I mentioned before that when you're in that scenario when it's really complex and you need to know what to do, if the policy's there, it helps direct us. We're not having to think on our feet, and it makes sure that you can actually focus on what the care you are providing. So why do we have it? Policies, procedures and guidelines to standardise operations. And that's not necessarily the physical operations, but the standard daily tasks that we do in everyday working life. Provides us with the clarity that we need about how we're supposed to operate and function, and guides our decision making. It also is important to facilitate adherence. I wonder if many of us would think about scenarios where have we actually followed policy and procedure, or have we deviated from it, or actually do we even have a clue if we have followed those policies or procedures, and do they even exist? And it helps promote compliance. Effective policies and procedures and guidelines help promote compliance. Again, as I said before, it reduces that variation, that potential practitioner who might be right, but also that potential practitioner who may be not quite as up to speed, doing the wrong thing. It's very clear how we should behave. I reiterate this all the time within the Safer Everyday framework. It talks about ensuring that we are reliable, that we standardise where we can what we do. We standardise practice so that there is no inequality in healthcare. Now, we know there is inequality in healthcare, but if our processes, our policies and procedures are standardised, then that helps to eliminate those risks. They should serve as a resource. They should be something that we go to immediately. I think possibly, maybe people don't. And it reduces that reliance on our memory, which I think fails us quite a lot sometimes. And certainly as I get older, I realise my memory is not always as good as I would like it to be. And it serves as a vehicle for movement or progress in practice. So knowing that things are changing in the world of healthcare, which is very, very advanced, isn't it? It constantly changes. You can hardly keep up sometimes, knowing that those policies and procedures are the way to advance and improve progress in practice. And they serve as the evidence that the organisation has standards in place that comply with regulation. So they are the thing that catches us out quite often. And they are the thing from experience of being in the quality and patient safety team for the last 11 years now, are the things that have let us down. If I think about some of our serious incidents, it's our communication, it's our policies and procedures either not being followed, not being adhered to, or not being fit for purpose, or maybe not even in existence, and us thinking potentially that they work when the reality of trying to put it into practice, it doesn't. So, again, purpose is to reduce that reliability by creating an environment of consistent, high quality care. That's what it's important about. And we all here want to deliver the best care we can to the people who we serve, whether we call them patients, service users, residents, whatever we call them. The people that we serve, we want to provide the highest quality care we can. So here's just some definitions of what policy or policy and procedures might look like. So the World Health Organization defined policies as a very general thing, as the decisions, the plans and actions to achieve specific goals within a society. Now that's very grand, that's very big, but if you draw that down to an organisational level, that still applies. But if you draw it down to that organisational level, I think this probably is a bit easier to understand. The decisions and actions and goals in the administration and accessibility of healthcare. Position or course of action reflecting decisions, intentions, choices made by government, society or other groups that sets out how resources and actions will be prioritised to address areas of concern. Now, a big statement, and that is from, it's fairly old, but it's fairly consistent and is still being used, and that is what they perceive policies to be about as a definition. But fundamentally, they set out your approach, your attitude and your values, and that's the crucial bit for us. They should be about the values that are important to our organisation, important to the people who work in it, important to the organisation as a whole, and important to the people who we serve. So how we develop policies is also really important, policies and procedures. Are we actually asking the people who are on the receiving end of that treatment, of that process or that procedure, how that should work? Maybe that's something to explore a bit more too. And without the policies and procedures in place, the organisation lacks the rules and guidance needed to respond to specific situations, and it leaves staff to improvise. And I don't know if anybody's ever been in that scenario where you feel like you're kind of steering a ship that's got no rudder or whatever you want to call that, and you don't know what you're doing, and you feel like you're, you know, flying by the seat of your whatevers. That's not a nice place to be. And it's definitely not conducive to keeping people safe or well, either ourselves or those we're looking after. So if we think about definitions between the two, because I think from my experience, and I think possibly others might feel the same, we kind of almost use the terms interchangeably. I think policy, procedure, we're not quite sure, what do we call it? Is it a policy? Is it procedure? Well, maybe this will help us guide our thoughts a bit more. So policy, in theory, are the big overarching aims of the organisation. They are the big hitters. They are high level. They set direction, guide and influence decision making, and they guide day-to-day actions and strategies whilst allowing a bit of flexibility. And they establish a framework of management philosophies with aims and objectives. Should be driven by business philosophy. So again, thinking about our values. So in HSC, not only do we have Safer Every Day, but Safer Every Day encompasses the care values that are being promoted now. So the care model, if you think about Safer Every Day, it completely embeds the E of care. And, you know, this is really important. Our policies and our procedures need to reflect that. They're high-level principles that set the tone, set the ground rules for an organisation, and it guides decisions in critical moments. Yes, some of this is repetitive, but it really is important because this is what grounds the model around why policies and procedures are important. And as we've mentioned, it leaves you not having to guess what you should do or hope that you're going the right direction. Now, from a procedure perspective, it's more narrow. It's actually trying to give you or give the person clear direction on what they're doing in that moment about a specific thing. It's a step-by-step process. It has a beginning, has an end, and it should be strictly followed to get to the desired outcome. It's a cycle process. It has uniformity, which is vitally important to ensure that we train new individuals in the processes, that we get compliance, and that we have process improvement, and priority around this is that we can audit. This is why it's a cyclical process. It's so we can audit the outcomes from procedures that have been implemented. As I said before, tied to policy though. A procedure without a policy probably doesn't really help, and a policy without procedures clearly won't provide you with what you need. And it should be developed with the customer and user in mind, and the customer and user predominantly will be the staff, but there is an element where that is also the user, the end user, the person we are caring for. And there's a greater sense of ownership. I think most people who write procedures tend to feel able to own that a bit more. I think there's potentially a notion that policies sit at somebody else's responsibility maybe, and it feels a bit more like I can own these policies, the procedures around this particular topic because it's my area of expertise, but the policies are a little bit wider reaching and not my responsibility. And they should of course be understandable, as should policies to be fair, but the procedure clearly needs to be understandable and should offer, where possible, options to the users in case of variation that is required. So some benefits between the two. So this is just looking at the pros, well, not pros and cons because you need them both, but the pros around them. So policy has defined boundaries, eliminates trial and error approach, and provides guidance on how to handle issues safely. Procedures reduce the learning curve and training time. So by having a procedure, even if I walked in an area that I was unfamiliar with, it wasn't my area of expertise, there's a procedure to follow, I should be able to follow that procedure and do a reasonably good job to help you and support you. And they're consistent and produce effective outcomes. So, not an ICU nurse, procedure to follow in ICU. I can't be an ICU nurse, but I can do the job properly because I have that procedure to follow. And it standardises our processes. Policy versus procedure. So this is just to highlight again, what is the difference then? So we said policies are the aims of an organisation, the high-end sort of approach that should change relatively infrequently. Now, that doesn't mean perhaps as infrequently as they have changed, maybe, when you look at some of our figures in a bit. But they change relatively infrequently. They focus on the who, the what, the when, and why. And they're broad and they are generalised. Procedures, however, are continuously changing and improving. New things come out, new technology, new evidence base. Our procedures need to change to reflect that. They focus on the what, how, when, and who. And they are more prescriptive, they are more descriptive, they are detailed descriptions of what you're trying to do. So those are the differences between the two, if that helps people sort of just recognise that. Regarding policies, there are 4 different groups that most policies and procedures can be grouped in. Patient service user care, pharmacy drug-related policies, HR, employee-related policies, and security-type policies, so keeping people safe. So if we think about these 2, patient service user care, we have the fact that these have to be the most comprehensive. They're guidelines for how staff care for patients and service users, and they are customised to the services that they deliver. So they need to reflect, so policies within HSC, for example, or with any area, but HSC specific, we deliver a lot of different services and a lot of different care, and there are some overarching policies that relate to all of us, but there will be individual policies, not just procedures, that are specific to the discipline within which they are working. So mental health policies will be different to those within oncology, to those within paediatrics, and so on. So they are customised to the services that are being delivered. And that's just a question, and I'm not asking you for any comments at this moment, but do we deliver high quality care? And that relates to anybody, not just HSC, but anybody on the call, on the team. Do you deliver high quality care? Pharmaceutical and drug policies usually are around handling storage, the medication, the registration of the drugs. It might be about how you manage the stock control, what you do when you need to get rid of things. And it also might be what happens when you misplace medications, potentially. So that's what those types of policies focus on. Security and privacy policies think about things such as how staff respond in an emergency that represents a security danger. So how do we respond to assaults, theft? How do we respond to the bigger issue, I think, for most of us at the moment is kind of the IT, navigating the IT world in general. There's so much more risk now, isn't there, with people who are trying to constantly scam, phish, whatever you want to call it. Can't keep up with all the names, but it's a constant risk, and they are targeting healthcare organisations, demanding big bucks to get release of your original data, or potentially my data, if they've managed to get into a patient record. And they need to be the most comprehensive as well. And when we think about sort of employee HR related policies, we're thinking, oh sorry, I missed that one off, but you can read that. When we think about employee HR policies, we're thinking about our well-being. What is the organisation, our organisation within which you work, doing about keeping you safe, keeping you well, in order to run a successful organisation? this is crucial, maybe, to recruitment. Not maybe, it is crucial to recruitment and retention. Policies. Would you want to come to an organisation that has policy? You know, you've got the choice of two wonderful jobs, pretty much similar, look good, and you've got one organisation that has policies and procedures that are evidence-based, constantly updated, you're really comfortable with that, and you've got another organisation that maybe is delivering the same services, but their policies and procedures perhaps haven't been looked at for a while, they look a little bit like maybe not, people aren't interested, then maybe we're going to have difficulty recruiting people and retaining them. And safely administering care to patients and service users, that's a focus around our policies. So making sure that people do the right thing, making sure staff do the right thing. Things about our security checks from a HR perspective, all of us need to be checked with the DBS, for example. Do we know that we've got staff employed for HSE or wherever who are decent, reliable people, who are not going to put people who we serve in vulnerable positions and at risk. So here's some other risks around policies and procedures and if we don't have them, potentially working as they should. So risks increase if our policies, if we develop a policy in one area and we haven't thought about talking to the rest of the organisation, and somewhere else, someone else has developed another policy of a very similar nature, but it conflicts with what we've said in the other policy. Therefore, we have two potential routes of course of action, and that is never helpful, because if something goes wrong in either of those situations, the organisation is very much at risk of being potentially misleading, because you have two options available, and it is, you know, which should be followed, and we could be very, very much caught out in that scenario, or the organisation could be. And it's the first thing that's going to happen, is if our policies aren't working well and we end up in a case for litigation and we are exposed because of our policies. And we have been there before now. Policy statements address what is the rule rather than how to implement the rule. That's the procedure. Policy statements should be readily available and their authority is clear, and they need to be consistent with a logical framework for employees. So we'll talk about where policies are located in HSC, but if you think about the organisation as a whole, do we think organisations as a whole, where people store policies is really important, but knowing that people are actually viewing those policies is even more important. How do you know that people are looking at the policies that we've put in a place that we say, well, everybody knows where it is, but do you know they're looking at them? And how do we ensure that that is actually going on? So I'm going to hand over to Jenny in a second for this. So what about HSC? And this is not, please, those who are not from HSC, relate this to yourself. Think about this for your areas of employment. So we did a survey, it was about April, May of 2021, to look at the understanding and the buy-in around policies, particularly policies within HSC. It was a survey that was broadcast to everybody. How many employees have we got in HSC? Around 2,000 and something employees. So the response rate may not appear to be that great, but it is what we got. And we got 57 responses during that period of time. I think when Jenny goes through the responses, I think you'll possibly see whether that you'd feel that was sort of reasonable. It is the approach of everybody within the organisation, whether that is something that is standard and how we would feel. I'll let Jenny explain.
Thank you, Vicky. Hello, everyone. So I've taken over a big, significant part of what policies and policies management process is for HSC within the last 3-4 months. And I've come to, although I was already involved and was involved in this survey back in 2021, I became much more involved in what the staff awareness and staff feedback was on what it is the current policy management in HSE and how it's working for everyone. So although this data is from 2021, I can very much tell you it's pretty much still accurate to the current days. I've just attended a webinar this morning which regarded learning from the best hospitals in the world, and Vicky just went through pretty much every single point of discussion that the speaker brought this morning to that webinar, which is very much none of this will work if we don't have staff engagement. So staff engagement, and there's studies that show that you can increase patient safety in 58% if you actually have staff engagement regarding every single process, especially governance processes that the organization has. And that's what we're trying to get staff engagement, because they've told us, they keep telling us, it's pretty hard to manage this. So one of the first things we asked at that time, and we're still asking in our escape audits, for instance, is if staff is aware of where to find and where to look for our policies, for HSE policies. It seems that it's very much well known. It's Polyplus. Most people don't necessarily like it, but we'll come to that in a few moments. Because you might not be missing it, especially in any time soon, because we'll have something better. Hopefully, we are aiming for that. And at the time, we had 95% of staff aware that HSE policies were available on Polyplus, and they knew how to access it. We also asked where they would look up for policies, which would not necessarily be only HSE policies, but anything regarding guidance that they would be looking for regarding their practice. So Polyplus was again the most mentioned, and they mentioned as well the bridge, because we do have some specific policies that are not HSE only. It's states of Guernsey, like the data protection one, for instance, and we have other policies that will link to the states of Guernsey, and they knew they would look for the bridge. Now it's Livewire, it's the new platform that we have. Some people did mention, and we very much know this, that some service areas have a folder with printed copies of their policies, or at least the policies that are relevant to their practice, which is not necessarily the best way of keeping them, unless they do have someone that will keep on track and will ensure that the latest version is there. And then, of course, we have the shared network drive and the Windows desktop of the HSE intranet page that may be available for each staff member desktop. Then we ask as well, are you aware of a policy that we have on policies and procedures? Because we do have one. We actually have a policy and a procedure that should guide you how to write policies, what process you should be following. This is currently being reviewed as well, but most of the guidance that it provides is still very much in place due to the current process we still have. And of the 57 respondents that we got within the survey, there were 21 that did refer this particular policy, which is G101. So some of them, whenever they wrote those policies, they never referred to that particular guidance. Others didn't even know that it existed. It was just a low number, 6 in 33. It's not that much, but still, we still have staff members that are not aware that we do have a policy to guide them writing their policies. Then we asked what were within the process of creating HSE policies, what were their thoughts about the process of preparing, reviewing and drafting a policy, if they identified it as straightforward or not so much. Only 3 of the 33 respondents identified as being straightforward, which is quite low, and 30 of them identified different barriers that they found within that process, from lack of protected time, which is one of the biggies, I'd say, for most staff members. Having been asked to write or review a document and not being aware of what process they should be following. Lack of time to actually type up the document, and also difficulties in getting feedback on the first early drafts that they would have of this document from the key stakeholders. And then again, very much along the same lines, difficulties in getting feedback from the wide consultation process, which was seen as quite onerous. And then we ask about the approval process, which seems to be even more complicated. I've been directly involved with that within the last few months, and yes, it is. It is really hard. We do have different parties that are relevant to this, and we need to keep them because, yes, we need for them to approve these documents, but I think that we don't have the best pathway between those parties, and the documents kind of lose their track within their process, which is very much a shame, because then authors get frustrated, staff don't have guidance to follow up to date, so it's a bit of a mess, I'd say, unfortunately. So that's what we're trying to focus on as well and improve. So they mentioned things from having the Service Governance Committee approval process delayed due to many different reasons, delays in getting the CMT approval as well, QGC, the Quality Governance Committee, which I must say it's probably the party that gets the bigger number of documents to be approved by them, so it's almost inevitable that is going to be a delay there. Although I think this has improved within the last couple of years, I believe. The subcommittees, as we call them, which could be the Health and Safety Committee, Caldecott Committee, Russ's Committee, so we have all these different committees that do need to give their saying to specific documents. And authors, when they do submit these documents to them, there's a bit of a delay there as well. And of course, as you might understand, all those meetings and all these committees meetings are not necessarily meeting and matching with each other, so it's really hard to follow that whole process and have your document approved within 3 months potentially, which would be a very good deadline, I'd say, but not happening. We also have, of course, the same thing happening with the Therapeutics Advisory Panel, and now that we have gone even deeper on how to improve this management process for policies and procedures for HSE, we understood that some documents are being sent to TAP with not necessarily needing to be sent to TAP. So there's a bit of a confusion there, which again needs a bit of more guidance and a bit of improvement regarding it. And those, of course, were the main ones, although we did have 2 staff members mentioning delays were not with committees, but with stakeholders not reviewing for months. And we've been part of it. We know that sometimes we have even just one single person saying, oh, I need to get back to you on this. And they keep saying that, but they never do. So you just have that document waiting for that particular person to give their feedback and just holding the document for not a reasonable justification, I'd say, but potentially lack of time. And then, of course, getting the policy written in the correct format, as I had not done it correctly. This is something else that we have identified, and it is within our recommendations. Training is definitely something that we need to provide to our staff, because there's a lot of questions regarding how this should be written, even the format itself, just getting it done, not being able to remove the watermark, not being able to change the header, seems to be small issues, but they become quite big when you actually need to have these documents live and accessible to staff. I already cover this, which very much is around what are the types of delays that can slow policy approval, and there's all sorts. Meetings being cancelled, having sent the document, but because there's, for instance, for QGC, you have a deadline to submit the document, which is usually at the beginning of the month. And although the meeting might happen 3 weeks later, if you haven't submitted in time, it won't be seen, it won't be reviewed and discussed at that meeting, so we'll need to wait for the following month. So sometimes these sort of things happen. And I'd say that potentially because staff are not aware of these schedules. They don't necessarily know when they should be submitting their documents to QGC, and of course they're then put on hold because they are pushed back. It's not going to be seen this month, it's going to be hold for the next month. So it's very much along those lines. So then we came up with suggestions that staff themselves have provided to us, which very much met what we had been able to gather when we liaised with 2 NHS trusts regarding this process, which we did in 2021. We have been keeping in contact with one of them because they've managed to bring their around 45% of policies out of date to 5% within a year. So they were definitely a good example for us to follow, and we have been liaising with them. And the recommendations that they gave us pretty much met what staff were telling us as well, which was replace Polyplus with a policy management system. Hey ho, yes, we heard you, and we are very much aware of that. We're really working hard to have that ready soon. Polyplus bridge search function poor. To be honest, Polyplus doesn't even have a search function. It has a search field, but it's not a function in itself because it doesn't function. So it's not functional at all. So no, we are working on that as well. And the new system that we'll have in place will have a proper search function, which hopefully will not be poor at all. Automated alerts about review dates? Oh yes, yes, that's one of our biggest aims with this new system. And as far as we are aware, we have someone from the States of Guernsey supporting us to set it up. And yes, this will all be running automatically, and everyone involved, including at QGC level, will get automated notifications about documents that are waiting for their approval. So that's how it's going to work now. As I've mentioned before, training, this had been identified. Support to type up once clinical content has been reviewed. Again, it's not only the fact that they need training, staff needs training regarding this, but we also might need to look for having admin support, which is really hard. We are very much aware of that. We know that it's not easy to have the admin support within every single department. Some have better, others don't have it at all. But the organization itself, and we are working towards that to try to identify how we can actually manage that, how we can actually achieve an improvement regarding that. It's not going to be easy, but still it's in our minds and we are aware of it. And need record of staff reading the policy and actually complying with the policy. That's what Vicky very well mentioned. We do have policies in place. Some of them even have an audit tool within the policy itself, within the procedure, but this is not taking place. So we are saying this is what you should be doing now, but we are not checking if staff has actually embedded the policy, embedded the procedure, and putting it in praxis. We don't know. And again, make the process shorter. That's what we're trying to do. The automated notifications and reminders will hopefully help us do that, because yes, it's too long, it's too onerous, and we don't want to keep it as it is. So I'll go back to Vicky now to just share a few more things about it.
What's next? Well, we've sort of alluded to it, but change is definitely happening. And something I quite like, I like Snoopy, but I do also like Sherlock Holmes. The game is afoot, and it feels a bit like, I don't know that it feels like a game, it feels like a mountain at times for what we're trying to achieve here, but we are positive. So, why are we changing things, and why are policy compliance, procedure compliance so crucial? It is really, really important. Why do we need it? Again, you've heard it before, you're going to hear it again. We need to comply with standards and regulations to provide safe, high quality care, fundamentally, and also keeping ourselves safe as staff. It's mandatory. We should be doing these things. And it's essential if the organisation is to thrive: recruitment, retention, keeping people safe. And we're a highly regulated, high-risk healthcare industry. Now, at present, there is no formal regulation in Guernsey. It will come at some point in time. And whilst we carry out scape audits regularly amongst many areas, if we were to have an organisational scape, of which we're trying to achieve, and one of those questions is our compliance to our policies and procedures, both keeping them in date, keeping them regularly reviewed, I think CQC would probably put us in special measures. And I don't say that with any pride or I don't say that at all, with feeling rather embarrassed to say it. So non-compliance, when individuals don't follow the rules, or if they don't even exist, then we have problems, and there are laws that potentially we are in breach of. So, this was our current status, dare I say, at the end of Q1 of 2023. So, you can see for many, many years we have been consistently inconsistent with keeping our policies, procedures and guidelines in date, reviewed, evidence-based. Not something we should be proud of at all, and something that leaves the organisation extremely vulnerable. We might as well go home now. Hey, we're really depressed. It feels really quite demoralising. But listen to that comment that Jenny mentioned. We have been in contact with people in the UK who've had similar trends to this for a long, long time, who have done the steps that we are trying to do, and within less than a year have managed to turn that similar figures around to less than 5%. So why not us? But again, it takes individual, not leaders purely. Individuals sign up to achieve anything of this. So, for those of us who may remember, I'll stick with this. Polyplus has been around an awful long time. Those who've been in HSC for a long time may recall it used to have a little symbol of a little parrot. I couldn't find that old icon, so you didn't get it, but it's Policy and Procedure Polyplus, and you know where to find it. It's on the internet page. What you may or may not realise is it is driven and relies on the old Internet Explorer as the browser. That's okay, because Internet Explorer has been updated to number 11, and Polyplus will no longer work in Internet Explorer version 11. Because Polyplus, for those who don't know, is not actually a label, a database of any recognition. It is not, I can't even think of anything. It is not, it's not TrackCare. No, don't berate TrackCare, but it's not a proper database. It is not. It was built by the States of Guernsey IT about 15, 16, maybe slightly longer years ago. By somebody who's very clever. We might have frustrations with it, but I couldn't build it. So they did a good job at the time, back in those days, of building Polyplus. They left the organisation probably 10 years ago, if not longer, and with it went anybody's knowledge about how to fix it, how to repair it. And between myself and Brian, we have tried to patch it up when it's collapsed in a heap. We know the search doesn't work, we know there are many problems with it, and it's been on its last legs since about 2017. So in 2017, 2018, we start trying to look at how we can change things. We become aware of SharePoint, now a name that is becoming more familiar to us now, but SharePoint back at that time was again quite clunky. We spent a lot of time with the IT team trying to build Polyplus replacement, calling it Polyplus because everybody knows it, into a SharePoint environment, only to find that we couldn't share in SharePoint with our partner organisations who needed to see our policies. There lies a problem with SharePoint. Anyway, fast forward to October-ish of last year, and we start to realise that Internet Explorer 10 is going to be obsolete as of the 14th of February 2023. Oh my gosh, what is going to happen? Are we going to be able to access it at all? Is Polyplus just completely going to fall off and you're not going to be able to see anything? We're in real concern. So what we were told to do by the IT, well, surely Polyplus people who've created Polyplus have got updates. They must know that Microsoft is changing. And I went back to them and went, it was you. And they went, oh, okay. So little did they remember that they built Polyplus. So there comes Microsoft 365 and the newer version of things like SharePoint. And this is where we are going. Now, thankfully, the old SharePoint has gone. The new SharePoint is looking rather quite amazing, and we're going to show you right at the very end a very quick look at where we're at. It doesn't look dead exciting at the moment, but when we got shown around by Nathan Silk from the States of Guernsey of what it can do, we did get excited. Now, I know this, as I said, this topic is a bit dry, but we did get excited because we could see how this was going to make your lives so much easier, our lives so much easier. So, exciting times. Policy Portal, that's what it's going to be called. You will access it via the Assurance Hub, which is available via Livewire, which is the new replacement to the Bridge. Talking to some people probably feels a bit gobbledygook, but those who know, know. So, our goal? Well, if they can do it, why can't we? So our goal is that we want greater than 95% of our policies documents to be regularly reviewed, updated, evidence-based. And I haven't added it on there, but boy do I want it within a year. Because if anybody else can do it, why can't we? So, I think some of these are the stickling points though, all of the things that we talked in the survey or what came out in the survey, but some of it is I've never written a policy and I've got no idea what I'm supposed to do. I've not had any training. Where do I even start? And I think that those are reasonable comments because most people don't have any training. And from what I can find, and I've never found any, there isn't any training locally around writing policies and procedures. It does not exist. So, to get things moving in the right direction, they're no good if they can't be seen by people. So, Policy Portal, Polyplus, Policy Portal is going to be a much better functionality. We'll be able to see people looking at it. You'll be able to see that it's being updated. And that is where we need you to go regularly. We must read and comprehend the policies within the organisation, and they must know both how policies of the company work and how and when to implement them. The other thing about this is they must be standardised. We've talked about the standard formatting. We are going to review what those current templates look like, but it is important they should be standardised. I should be able to look at it in one place and go somewhere I don't know anything about and be able to know what I'm looking for. If they look completely different or very, very different and confusing, then I'm going to struggle, and we don't want that. And again, we need leadership to be buying into this, and they do. They buy into the problem that we've got, and they need to be part of the solution, but so does everybody in the room. And we need to keep our goal in mind. Why am I writing this? What is the purpose? So when do we think we need these things? When do we need a policy or a procedure? Has something happened before that makes me think I need to do something to make sure it either doesn't happen again or does happen again? What are the chances that it might happen again? Are there potential consequences and risks if we don't have something in place? And again, it needs to demonstrate that the organisation puts the safeguards in place to keep both our staff but also our service users, patients safe, and it can also demonstrate when they are not being followed. Putting systems, protocols and safeguards in place from the start reduces the risk of liability. And sadly, we are in a litigious world, aren't we? And that is something we do need to sort of factor in quite highly. Risk cannot be completely eliminated, but effective policies reduce the penalties and consequences because we'll be reconsidered as doing the right thing. We did the right thing, but it still happened. We did everything we could, and that person still fell. We did everything we could, and that's okay. Those things do happen. If we've got the right things in place, then so be it. And health policy frames our professional roles, defines nursing practice, but not just nursing practice, our allied health professionals practice, and prioritises and targets resources and directly impacts on service users' day-to-day lives. They need to be concise, consistent, easy to read. Sorry. Do you know there's a policy? How many pages is that? Is that big one?
240 almost, if I'm not mistaken.
A big policy, that big, massive adult safeguarding policy. 200 pages. Gonna read it? Gonna know what to do in emergency? Nah.
And then again, it's because, and sorry, Vicky, not meaning to interrupt you there, but just jump in a bit.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what Vicky already mentioned at the beginning of the session, which is what is a policy, what is a procedure? And when you do understand that world, you'll realize that we have a big policy because it has potentially 10 to 15 procedures within it, and we're still calling it the policy. The policy is needed, but it needs to be broken down into the different procedures that are within it. So that's the big issue. And of course, then it would allow people to focus whenever they need to focus on that particular point of the process they need to follow, because it is a procedure linked to that big policy. But then again, you wouldn't have one big one with 200 plus pages, which is just a nightmare for staff to follow, of course, especially in an emergency, as Vicky very well highlighted.
That's when you need it. You need policies and your procedures when you're in that situation. So use short, everyday words wherever possible. Keep the sentences brief, and so that people can find what they need, they can understand what they find, and use what they find to meet those needs. So here's just some practical bits that I thought we'd have a bit of a look at. And what I'm going to do for those who are interested is there will be a session in July. The QI clinic that's scheduled for July, I'll put the screen up at the end, will be giving another opportunity for us to look into a bit more detail around how we write these. So what I'm suggesting that is, if you are currently trying to write a policy or procedure, or need to update one, or are fed up with looking at a policy or procedure that is so out of date and you really need updating, maybe you could try doing the updates and bring it along. Let's sit round the table together, let's have a look at it, let's see if we can try and help guide and steer and look at how we can make things work better for all of us. It can feel very overwhelming. I think even some of the very basics, you know, I think the problem most of us feel is we are clinically competent at the clinical skills, but we might not be very good at writing a document on Word, for example, and dealing with all the formatting and putting all the whatever full stops wherever, and as you say, getting rid of the watermark. It can be very frustrating. So it needs to be far more than general guidelines. They need to set expectations to do things the proper way. Guide day-to-day activities, promote consistency. You get the message? You're taking this message home? To reduce mistakes and keep people safe. So standardised, well-organised policy structure helps make policies easier to navigate. Now I'm really promoting flowcharts. Flowcharts. Right at the very front of a policy would be really nice, because that's the first thing. I don't want to go 10 pages down to find that flowchart of what I've got to do. Put it near the front, make it really clear, that's what you need to follow. I can then, when I've got 5 minutes to take a breath after having dealt with that situation, look into the detail and what the policy talked about and the recommendations or the references around that. Look at that later. Fine. Yeah, absolutely. So looking at how these structures work is something we are going to be doing as the team, but putting things like flowcharts wherever possible, nice and simple, will help people. They need a date, they need a policy number. That will also at some point in time change, because I don't know anybody else, but it's quite hard to navigate our policy numbers. We don't really know what they mean. They're all over the place. When you read some of them, you think, my goodness me, have we got 1,110 documents? Probably not.
No.
Well, we might have,
And there's a bit of a risk as well, now that I'm even more familiar with the index numbers we have for our documents, because we might have, for instance, G210 that might link to community services, and I'm just randomly pulling up a number, and then you have G201, which is maternity, and they don't link to each other. And it might be, if the person doesn't find the right one, it says, no, it's the wrong one, this is maternity, but I wanted community. So it's just a big mess that we'll have to sort out at certain point as well.
Yeah, we are hoping to do that. It's not going to happen as we go live with the portal, but it is something that's very much on our radar. So and they might well be applicable statutes and laws that, you know, need to be pinned behind all of this. You need approvers, we've talked about that. People need to be responsible for approving, and then procedures need definitions, examples for how you do things. So those in HSC will know the name Brian O'Connell, unless you started in January of 2023 or any time since January 2023, will know the name Brian O'Connell. Brian was one of our team, and a great asset he was, and nearly 30 years working for HSC. And I can tell you now that most people believed that Brian was responsible for the policies. For all policies in HSC, Brian O'Connell was responsible for them all. He was responsible for us, if we received an update from a policy, no matter what it looked like, if it was on the back of a piece of scrap paper, maybe, possibly, all the track changes visible, you've got no idea whether they've been actually accepted or if they're still considered, sent to Brian, and Brian will put it up on PolyPlus, and he'll tidy it all up for you and make sure that, yeah, it was a nightmare. Though they cannot fall to one person. This is everyone's responsibility. We need a collaborative approach. You might have an owner, absolutely, but that person isn't the one responsible for writing that whole policy. The person needs to own it and chivvy those people who need to be part of that collaborative approach to get that policy guidance, whatever, in place. They need regular review. Now, policies potentially annually, procedures possibly more frequently. Some policies can go slightly further, slightly longer, but there should be an annual check at least on policies. Might be a very quick check. Have we changed names in the organisation, the different parameters within the departments, within the directorates, of which that happens a lot in this place. So yeah, you need to change it quite quickly if that happens. They need to be revised to meet best practice, and they should be grounded in law and standards. Some of you are working in areas of HSC that are working towards the accreditation processes, be that mental health, be that theatres, and that's one way of building up trust for the organisation. But equally, that accreditation is going to look at our policies and procedures, and woe betide, if they're not in date, we're not going to get accredited. If they're not regularly reviewed, we're not going to stay accredited. So it's very risky, and if done wrong, even more, it's going to put people at risk. We need to include measurable objectives. Mention it briefly, Jenny also said it. Policies, procedures, they need to be cyclical. They should have an audit at the end of it. We should know whether people are following those policies. How do we measure that people are doing that? How do we know that what we're doing is working? All of that needs to take place. Most policies and procedures should have an audit at the end of it, which should be part of creating that policy and procedure right from the outset. And that then needs to be carried out as a function, as an automatic function, something we do regularly. And again, this idea of using easy to understand language. And acronyms, what a nightmare. Okay, we will produce a list of approved HSC and acronyms, and we won't be encouraging any use of any others. We have been caught out quite significantly in incidents where acronyms have caused some real upset for people. I won't say what they were, but can be risky business because we think we know what we're talking about and we could be completely on the wrong page.
And we actually have a policy on that.
We do.
That says that we shouldn't be using them.
We shouldn't be
which
using
is
them.
a care records policy.
Yeah.
So,
And if we do have to have some, they have to be the ones that we approve. So we're going to work on that list of what is actually acceptable. And this is a good point, isn't it? You know, we're all here coming from kind of a medical kind of healthcare background. And so when we read some things, we understand it because it's the nature of our business. We need people who are not medical, who are not clinically trained to read it. Can they understand it? So that's something perhaps we need to consider better. Maybe we need service users on our policy and procedure developments. That would be a nice idea. So we talked about this already. Who's responsible for the review and sign off? It could be that it's a service governance group. Quite often that is reasonable and appropriate. It might be that we need different type of approval. So this is not the final approval, but kind of recognition that it's gone through a ratification by TAP, for example, that the drugs are okay, they're in stock, they are licensed, you know, they're on the white list, all of that type of stuff. And all of that should be done as part of the review process before you even take it back to your governance meeting, wherever that forum is that you get to go through your policies. Because that is primarily where you're going to sign them off. If it needs to go to QGC, to the Clinical Quality Governance Group, then it's got to have gone through your internal service governance process first. So you have got to have done all of those things before you even come to QGC. That is just the rubber stamp. So making sure you've done everything else and your service is happy with it is the priority. Automated routing, we've talked about that, is going to make a massive difference and should make the ability to keep things up to date much better. Accessible to all. Now, one thing I think we probably forget to do, with the exception, and I'm going to put the name out there because actually I think this is one person we could follow better, Liz Dorry. Okay, and I will name, because go and speak to her because she does this. She really does. If she writes and updates any policy or introduces a new guideline, she goes out and teaches it before it's out there, before it's out in paper. Definitely she teaches people. We are not good at this at all. We're not good at teaching people around the policies and processes. We just expect them to do it, and it's there. Training, it's an essential part, and it helps employees see how policies apply to them. Helps them walk through how they do the procedures and follow procedures. Again, measurable goals and objectives help determine whether the policies and procedures are effective. How many times, I've seen it certainly in some of our investigations, where we think a policy or procedure is working and then something happens. You go and you ask the staff and they say, yeah, but that doesn't work. We can't do that bit. And you're like, well, why haven't you changed it then? What, you know, if they're just blatantly flaunting proper best evidence practice, that's another thing. But actually, if it's the practical element that they can't do it, then why have you not changed it to make it what you can actually achieve? So that's really important. Regular compliance monitoring to ensure that the document is working effectively. And here, I'm just going to pass back to Jenny really on this bit, but this is the policy cycle, which I hope you can see from there for those in the room, but on Teams it's probably a little bit easier.
So this shows what is and has been asked to us to make it shorter. Yeah. It does look that has a lot of steps, but we can actually make those 11 steps, as this particular one refers to, in a short way. It doesn't need to be long, it just needs to be effective. And we need for those 11 steps that are included there to actually be effective and worked at every single stage. So if you have a new policy that you need to implement, but the same thing applies once you are reviewing a current policy, it's the same thing, it will follow the exact same pathway. You need to assign it to a policy author and approver as well. And we have created flowcharts regarding this in particular, and we have suggested for this to be done at the service governance level. So we are very much aware that not every single department has a service governance in place effectively. So if we don't, we need to start having them, because that's the starting point and a relevant starting point for this to be followed. Because then when you do have a new document or a current one that the person that is identified there as the author is actually not even working for HSE anymore, you need to assign that to someone else. And at a service governance level, that's where you can actually make those decisions. From that point, you then need, of course, for the author to start doing their research, collecting data, and engaging with subject matter experts regarding it. That's when the consultation process starts, which has been identified as one of the hardest ones to go through, because then again, as Vicky has very well highlighted before, we need for every individual to actually commit to this and understand their responsibility within this whole process, so relevant to all of us. Following that, there's the writing the policy itself, of course. If it's a new one, it might take a bit of more time, but if you do need a new policy, again, we need to be proactive instead of reactive. So we won't be writing a brand new policy in just 1 week time. That's pretty much impossible if you want to have a good one. So you need to plan ahead. You need to identify the people you need to involve and when you're going to write it. And as much as possible, allocate and have protected time, which we know was one of the issues that staff have identified, not having the protected time to actually do it. But we do need to identify the ways to facilitate this. Otherwise, we won't be getting off this loop and this vicious cycle anytime soon. Review and revise the document itself, which should circulate among subject experts as well. So you have the first group of consultation lists that we usually have in each document, which are the ones that are relevant to whom you go to write your policy or review your policy. Once that process is completed, then you have a second stage, let's call it like that, to the consultation process, which is going to TAP, going to RESS committee if it regards their matter, all of those that might need to be involved at that particular stage, which is identified there as number 5, step 5. Then you have to approve the policy itself. And you do have, we always refer to policy, it's easier, but it applies to everything, policies, procedures and guidelines. So what we need to identify as an organization is which pathway each type of document should follow. If it's a guideline, potentially, we have maternity services, for instance, who do that very well, allocate just to their service governance level. Doesn't necessarily need to be brought to QGC, for instance. Procedures, that might be a different question there, because we do have clinical clinical knowledge that applies there, and we might need for that to be approved at a QGC level, because it might also apply across the organization to other services, although it might start in one specific one. So that's one of the things that we need to focus as well. And then we have the non-clinical documents as well, which might then need to be brought to a CMT level. This all needs to be well defined and very well written and explained as guidance on the policy G101 that I've mentioned before. The following step is, of course, to distribute the policy to relevant individuals and departments. So that's where we have obtaining the policy acknowledgement and training and implementation coming in. That's how Policy Portal hopefully will help everyone, because once you have the document approved and uploaded onto the system, it's going to notify everyone that needs to be involved in these 3 steps to actually be able to distribute and make staff aware that this is now in place, this is now the new guidance, it's what you need to follow, and it's very much up to date. And of course, then we come to step 10, which is reporting and monitoring. Reporting and monitoring, that's where audit comes in. So I've mentioned before, Vicky stressed it out again, we do need to monitor if the documents we have in place, if our policies and procedures are being followed. And we actually need to do this by auditing, by monitoring through other processes if we identify them as more suitable, but we do need to have evidence that this is being applied, this is being followed, and staff are actually, it's just to avoid those situations that Vicky just mentioned, having staff saying within a swarm, for instance, oh no, we're not doing that because that's not practical, that's something that we are not able to follow. If you were monitoring, you would be able to know that in advance, and you wouldn't wait for an incident to occur to identify that issue. So that's what we want to prevent. And of course, then it comes to review and make possible updates. When we say that all documents should be looked at in a yearly basis, at least, especially policies, we are not saying that they should be updated every single year. It's just to look at it and ensure that it's still following evidence-based that we need to follow. It's not to say you need to look at it and you actually need to change something in it every single year. No, it shouldn't work that way. We should only be changing it if it needs to be changed. Otherwise, why we would be doing that? But we do need to look at them. So we do have some documents, and you might notice this, and this is something that, going back to what Vicky mentioned about standardizing the documents, it's not standardized. Some of the documents have the issue and review date, others have issue, review date, and expiry date. So should we have that for all documents? And what this means is, usually policies are reviewed or expire in 3 years' time. So the review date, it's actually 1 year time. So for instance, if the policy has been issued today, as the 8th of June of 2023, the review date is going to be in a year time, the expiry date is going to be in 3 years' time, it's going to be 2026. So this is something that potentially we might need to start doing. And I can tell you that Public Health is one of the departments that does this, because they do look at their policies on a very, and PGDs, it's one of the most common documents that they have, of course, on a very regular basis. They still have the 3 years expiry date, but they look at them at least every year. So that's something that we should be thinking about. And again, this needs for every department at service governance level as well, to look at their documents, to look at the document they own and their staff is responsible for, and think which is the right pathway. Because although we are trying to standardize things, and we'll do that regarding templates, for instance, the process itself, the pathway, doesn't necessarily need to be the same one for each single department. It might actually need to have a few differences, because the practice that they have in each department is different as well. Social care have potentially a different approach in ADS, in community services, than we have in hospital-based services, for instance, and different from nursing care. So we do need to identify all of that and put that in place to make it work for everyone.
Yeah. So really that's the end of it, and I know it was long and it was probably rather repetitive, but I think we're trying to get a really important message across. We were going to do the little bit of the survey, if that's okay. I'm going to share it on the screen on Teams. Jenny, are you able to swap it on there? So for those on Teams, you will see, I'm going to ask Simon potentially to just push the screen up so people have got a bit of an opportunity to read it. Just going to share with you the questions that were asked, and we're just going to literally have 5 minutes, if that, for people to consider their responses.
I do have it on my screen, but for some reason it's not coming up.
Okay, well that's all right. Don't worry, we've got it on the screen here, so I will stand. Oh, we've got paper copies, have we? So we've got here, if you saw a policy out of date, what would you do? So there's a couple of options there to consider. What would you do if a policy was out of date? Phone Brian O'Connell. Yeah, going to be ringing Ireland now then. How are you made aware that a new or updated policy has been issued? So these were just some examples. Have you ever written a new policy or reviewed and updated an existing one? If your answer is no, we go to the question 9, but if your answer is yes, stay going on. Now, obviously we're talking about HSC ones here, but those who aren't in HSC, just relate it to your own work business, please do. Did you refer to your own policy on how to do policies and guidelines, if that exists? Have you received any training on how to review and update a policy? And did you encounter any difficulties when writing and reviewing policy or procedures, and preparing, there we go, the final draft? Did you encounter any delays when trying to get your policy approved? At what stage did you encounter delays? And then what suggestions do you have? So yeah, I guess from my perspective, all the other questions are important and helpful, but I guess even in our stages where we're trying to work now, the last one there is how can we continue to improve policies and that procedure process? If you've got any suggestions, we are all ears. We are very welcome. We think we've got the right place, but what that still looks like is very much in the making, shall we say. It's not finalised as of yet. So just a couple of minutes there. Can I just get you to put it back onto the presentation, onto the last slide?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Just with the...
Yeah, I just
Yes.
improvise and
Thank
just put
you.
it there.
the next one.
There you
There we go. So, thank you, well done.
go. No worries.
So just these are dates for the diary for people to just be aware of. So we are going to not repeat, do something more on this topic in July. So the 18th of July, I really do encourage you, those who are interested, struggling, responsible, whichever, all of the three, to come along perhaps with a document that you're struggling with or you want to look at, and let's see what we can put our heads together and try and do something collectively in the room, physically at the Gateway. That also applies to those who are not HSC. I'll just reiterate that again. It's open to anybody who's got to write it. I don't care where you work. If you've got to write a policy and a procedure and you want some help and you want to discuss things with people who've got the same issues, come together. So that's July the 18th, and I'll do that from 2 till 3:30. The next QI clinics, the more recent one, is the 27th of June, and again we're going to do from 2 till 3:30. And this session, and it's open to everybody, but the focus will be on those who are carrying out the IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, open school online training that they started in April. It will be an opportunity for us to come together as a group and network. So that's one priority. Another priority will be to come together with ideas and challenges, maybe with actually doing the training if they're struggling with anything, but open discussion. And then primarily to think about what is it that we could consider developing in your own areas, in joint areas. Some of these QI clinics have been really, really successful. So this is a great opportunity for those who are doing the IHI training to come and talk about it, but it is open to anybody. So it isn't just for them, but obviously the focus will be on the kind of discussions that are coming out as a result of the training. The next presentation session, which I did take off because I put the wrong date on it in my head. I was thinking it was the 15th of August, but that's a quality improvement clinic. The actual presentation session is the 29th of August. So I'll go back to my original thoughts, and the presentation on the 29th of August will actually be around the role of the clinical safety officer for the electronic patient safety, patient records for the EPR. So what is that role? Who is fulfilling that role? Why is it important? Why is it crucial that you are engaging with them right now before we get a new EPR? So that will be taking place on the 29th of August, again, here and on Teams. These sessions will be on Teams, again, the QI clinics will be on Teams. It will be better in person, it always is, to be honest. It's a lot easier to sort of have those conversations in the room together. So if you can make it, please do come. I'll try and go a little bit fancier than... we had ginger nuts today, I think. So, and we've got Quality Street in the room, but I'll try and do something a bit more fancy for the next one. Right, questions. Are there any questions?
Yes.
Brilliant. We will try.
So it goes back to one of your.
Hang on a minute, Sarah. Sorry, it's my fault. We've got a microphone in order that people on Teams can hear you. So please, sorry, that's my mistake. I should have remembered to say before you start talking.
Sorry. So it really does relate to one of these questions that's here in this survey, and that is about how do you know which policies need to be updated? And the answer is I don't have a clue which policies are relevant to me or which ones need to be updated. So are you going to be distributing a list of what needs doing to each area?
We are.
We are.
It starts again because I'm quite aware that you do have service governance meetings in place. They do work more or less well, I'd say. So the plan is for us to send to the associate directors, eventually operational managers to whom this may apply, the list of the documents that we have identified according to what we have on Polyplus at the moment, because again, this has been a big chunk of work and it's not been easy to identify which belong to where. So we are doing this at the moment and we'll be sending out those lists to the associate directors respective to your specific service area, and they should be the ones leading that process and getting that information to all staff within the department, within the service area.
Second question.
Yes, please.
What happens then when it's a policy G210? I see that in my sleep.
Oh dear.
But the issue with it is it's about medication. It's written for the whole of HSC. There is a very small section about community services.
Yes, I'm aware.
So whoever's updating that one, will we have some input into that? Because community services is medications management is a large part of our job.
Absolutely.
It is.
So yeah, here goes the problem that lies with many things is people not taking full responsibility. So if you are interested in a policy and it's affecting your business and it's either out of date, then I would very much encourage you to focus on the bit that's important to you, which is therefore community in your case, and focus on what needs to happen, what does it look like, what should it look like in your area, and develop it as best as you can. It is an overarching policy, as you rightly talked about, but there are processes and procedures potentially that differ depending on where you are working, and we need your expertise, or they, pharmacy, need your expertise. So please work on the community bit. You are important and you will be listened to. I know it's terribly out of date and we can't necessarily purely update your section, but please work on it so that it can become part of that joint overarching project.
What I would suggest, and we have identified this as something that would potentially work, because again, that's one of the measures that they implemented back in Nottingham Care Partnership and the organisation we have been liaising with. It's actually have staff go to the author of that particular policy, just like you mentioned. There's an author and there's a person responsible for it. So if they are not coming to you, just go the other way around. Just let them know we actually want to have something on this policy that we think should be a bit more developed, that it's not at the moment, and we know that they are working on it. They are quite recent to the organization as well, but we know they are working on it. So I would strongly advise you to actually get in contact with them and say what you've just shared with us.
Well, I have done, so I hope they get back to me.
I'd go.
Okay,
have you gone to the top level of
Well,
that? The new person that's just arrived.
No, Caroline Zaire, the
Right.
deputy chief pharmacist, because Bev Paul we did go to, but Bev Paul is now, of course, left.
Yeah.
So she left it with Caroline because the new person wasn't
Yeah.
quite in post at
The
the time.
policy was never ever supposed to be left with the chief pharmacist at all. The policy sat very firmly with the pharmacy manager for the PEH hospital services, and only went to the chief pharmacist at the point when we didn't have a pharmacy manager. But I very much think a good conversation with Tina Bogle, who is our new chief as well, about that. I've literally spoken to her about it this week again. Yeah, we should see some momentum, but anything that you can do to actually improve the bit that focuses on community, the bit that focuses around adult disability, the bit that focuses around how we do things in mental health, do what you can so that we can get it into a formula, please. I know that.
Hi, it carries on really from that. How do you link policies together? So policies that might have say, for example, about the medication, might have a link with those who have swallowing problems. So you actually need to modify that in line with people's swallowing problems and in terms of people with learning disability as well. So to avoid there being loads and loads of separate policies, surely it's better to have a series of procedures that go into that one policy.
And that's more what really adult disabilities should be, is more about the procedure of how you do medication and how you do it in community and how you do it in mental health. And from that perspective, this is about that collaboration. It is about thinking about the far-reaching episode. So what we've got a checklist at the moment that will be being issued. And again, we're going to start at kind of the associate and service governance level, and the expectation is that checklist document, we hope we've identified all the kind of groups that maybe need to be consulted on as part of the review process. The idea is that everybody will be responsible for identifying which of those apply to whichever documents in their services. So that's the plan. And then we will end up with a great big list of everything, so we can know it as a quality and patient safety team. But you will then know, and hopefully have consulted with people who it affects, so as you say, dysphagia, whatever, and how we might manage that. So that we're looking at how we do that better and make sure the right people have been spoken to and involved in making sure that the policy is right.
And the new system, the feature that the new system will bring, will actually be able to, for instance, for this particular one, without wanting to name anyone in particular, but just as a very good example, because it's such an overarching one, the G210, we can have Tina as the author, if she remains as the author, and whoever they have identified as the relevant parties, they'll be identified in the system itself, and they'll have what will be called as acknowledgement level, which needs to be completed for us as the quality and patient safety team who's overseeing the process to actually upload the document. So for instance, if you're there as a speech and language therapist that needs to be involved in that process, and you haven't actually confirmed as having acknowledged that that policy was reviewed and it has been discussed with you, we would be pushing it back to Tina saying, this is not completed, I'm very sorry, not able to upload it yet because we just checked and the system tells us that Claire hasn't been involved yet and she should be. So that's how the process will look like. Hopefully those automated functions will prompt people to follow what they need to do regarding each document. We cannot ensure that absolutely, but yeah, we're hoping for that to work because they'll keep having reminders on their emails coming in, letting them know you need to acknowledge this, you need to approve this, whatever the level might be. So yeah. Thank you.
There's no question on Teams. There is a suggestion on Teams about how do we improve processes and things, and that was talking about the compliance in particular, about using opportunities like staff meetings, and I think that's absolutely should be part of a regular discussion. How are we doing on any policies and processes that we have responsibility for, or again flagging up those that are just been updated and reviewed, making sure people are aware of them. So I think that compliance is a good thing to be part of staff meetings for certain. Is there any other questions that you've got? Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, a lot of the ones that we deal with are probably about clinical issues, and I know that I'm mindful that we follow the Royal Marsden guidelines. How are we trying to reduce duplicating things across both areas?
Wonderful. I'm so glad you said it, because that's the one bit that we haven't actually focused on and we really should. So the Royal Marsden, surely to goodness, is the clinical, it is the Royal Marsden Bible for clinical procedures and guidance. Why, therefore, are we paying an extortionate amount of money if people aren't using it, would be my question. We also pay an extortionate amount of money for a Marsden that's actually editable. And certain areas of our services are really good at looking at the clinical guidance in the Marsden and seeing if there are some challenges to doing that in Guernsey, because sometimes there are. And what they do is write alongside the difference and the tweak that you might need to do because you live in Guernsey. So that access to the Royal Marsden, we might need to work out how that could be broadened slightly outside of HSC, because that would still apply, I would have thought, potentially for some areas, and maybe we should look at what that looks like. But ultimately, scrap procedures if they exist on the Marsden. Absolutely stop it, please, because we don't need it. Update it, if you know, tweak it if you need to by the editable version. We pay a lot. We hardly get enough traffic through the Marsden, which is really bad because it is the Bible, really, for what we should be doing. So use the Marsden, edit it for anything that is specific to Guernsey bailiwick practice.
Yeah. Everything stuff Nana is able to edit it.
Yeah, we can.
Have, identified what they need to do and what procedures they actually need to tweak.
Yeah,
It's easy to
we can show you. Somebody who's really good at it is urology. Sorry?
Just go and change something.
No, it is. There is a way, yeah, to check. So, but yeah, somebody who's really good at it. And again, to be honest, I would say that would still be part of a process of coming and saying, look, I'm not, you know, we need to do this. Are we happy with that? You know, and talk to the team, basically, talk to us. But yes, you can do it. It would be the expectation of the clinical nurse for urology, for example, does it all the time. So absolutely, people with responsibility. But yeah, you've got to be accountable. That's a Royal Marsden. If you go around altering it incorrectly, you'll know about it.
And just to give you an example, we have 3 different departments using it. Oncology is one of the areas that refer to the Royal Marsden procedures, and the other 2, what they do is simply have a document, because we still have a few references to those particular procedures on Polyplus, and it's simply a one-page document that says please refer to, and has the link to the Royal Marsden. So there's no policy, no procedure on Polyplus for it, because it actually, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You have this amazing resource available in the organization. So why, as Lucy very well said, should we be duplicating things that are already so well written? And we just need to adapt. And we are actually able to adapt those to our reality here in Guernsey. So yes.
I think there was somewhere along the lines some notion that we had to at some point in time. I think either got lost in translation that we had to have our own, but no, we don't. And it's too much work. And yeah, we can even on the new policy portal when it exists. So if somebody does go there to look for something, it will point them straight to the Marsden. Yes. We'll get it doing that specifically, but yeah.
And the other way around as well. So if you go straight to the Royal Marsden, it will actually say that it links to previous policy number, whatever it might be. So yes, yes, they are linked. But again, we only have 3 departments using it. So yeah.
So I've just put on my sheet, maybe it's another question, maybe it's just a comment, that if people have got policies or procedures or guidelines, would the first step actually be to come and talk to you first and say, this is an existing one, I'm thinking, why do we need it? Should we remove it? Should I spend hours updating it? And then you go, why have we done that? Because we don't need that one. So maybe my first step for the next one would be to come to you and say, this is what it is.
I would advise you to first go to your service governance meeting and have that discussion there, because you're the ones, we might advise you and support you throughout the process, but who actually needs to approve if that one is to be removed or replaced, it's at service governance leaders. Yes.
Okay, and the second one maybe is a comment. I'm accustomed, but now over, doing educational study. So I'm just used to doing a big reference list, and I'm not sure that the policies that I read do the referencing in the way that I'm used to it, and I've probably gone way overboard in the way I've done it and referenced it because it doesn't seem to match others. Is there a standard bit of how we're supposed to reference them?
As far as I'm aware, we don't have that in G101, but we should have.
It should be.
Yes.
It should be the way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's the way
Yes.
that you would be doing. That would be the way that.
And like you do an assignment where it
Absolutely.
and then you go and
Yes.
find the author.
I'd say we should follow what the Institute recommends. It's
Because
the
the
same
problem
one.
is I've inherited a policy that has at the end a bibliography. I'm not going to read what somebody referenced there, and then a reference list which goes back to documents that are more than 15 years old, and I think I'm not going
those should be removed. I
use
can
these.
tell you for sure those should
Absolutely,
be removed
they have
straight
been
away.
removed. Yeah,
Yes.
that's fine. But you can't find which bit they wrote that linked to it
That
because
linked-
they've
yeah.
not put it in the
Yeah.
document.
Yeah, of course. Yes, good point. Thank you, Lucy.
Just double check again. There wasn't. No, there isn't.
I would just, before we end, with having a quick question to you regarding what you think, considering normal and business as usual practice, the time scale for you to actually start reviewing policies that you might need to update because they are coming close to the date they need to be reviewed. What do you think? What are your thoughts about it?
It's going to take about 3 months to get it through all the relevant committees.
But it shouldn't. I think this is what we're trying. So the idea being, we are really trying to streamline it. Seriously, we have kind of estimated a sort of a 3-month process potentially, 6 maybe at the most. For those that are out of date, actually I want it done in 2 weeks, but there we go, which is majorly problematic. But 3 months to 6 months would seem reasonable. We should be able to, but it is a case of the owner, author, the coordinating person, working collaboratively with all those people to pull it together.
Fiona
I
doesn't
need it.
think that's feasible. Yeah,
But
because
this,
that's
but
what
it's
we
the,
think.
it's the
It's
ownership.
yeah.
Working with a policy that's taken so far about a year and a half.
I know, but this is
And
these
just
are
the
the
process of
changes.
reviewing it without even going to the approval steps, just the reviewing. Yes. Okay.
To get the right stakeholders, to get it through a committee that then sat on it, that then was nudged.
And this is
and
what
then
these
sat
are the
on it,
challenges that
and
we've
then
got.
Passed it back and then sat on it. Year and a half. I've inherited it.
No.
But this is
not good.
where this we're preaching to people potentially who get it, but this is the problem. This is where it's a collaborative approach. This is where we need the buy-in. This is where we need to really own the fact that we've got 63% of our documents out of date. What are we doing about it? And time is precious for everybody. But I'm sure you feel like you've wasted a year and a half of your time and not got very far.
Only 6 months for me.
But But we're trying to streamline these processes, and it shouldn't take, and it's atrocious that it does. So, we are setting some specifics, and we will do, and I think people need to probably, what I'm like for saying about incident reporting it, start putting it in, start making this place own it. When you've not got that response back, and if you've not got that response back, well, potentially they haven't responded, so you carry on and get what you can from other people.
Yeah, because if you don't get that feedback from you that are involved in the process as such, we are not able to raise it as a risk as well
Yeah.
to the organization. Because if we identify that the problem is with the committees or the QGC or CMT or whatever it might be, we actually need to focus on that and understand what needs to be done. Because everyone keeps thinking it's the authors. They are not doing what they should be doing to have the policies in date. But actually, it's not. Might be for some cases, of course, but not most of them, I'd say. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your contributions. Please leave your sheets around. We'll take up whatever suggestions you've got. And thank you. And as I say, please come along to any other events as you can and support.